My name is Charles Epting, and you're listening to the Lost Labels podcast. In part one of this two-part episode, we spoke to Steven Alexander from Model Citizens. Model Citizens was a short-lived band from New York City that released their first and only EP on Spy Records in 1979. As we discussed last time, Spy Records was a label founded by and produced by John Cale of the Velvet Underground, and Model Citizens was one of only a handful of 7 inches that they ever put out. In today's episode, we're going to be speaking to Eugenie Diserio, who was another of the core members of Model Citizens. But before we talk to Eugenie, I wanted to just go over a little bit of history about the band themselves. A big part of Model Citizens was their appearance on stage, and it seems like every rock critic in New York at the time tried to one-up one another in the way they described Model Citizens. Tim Page from New York Rocker said, quote, "Saw Model Citizens at Max's. They remain a fascinating band musically and visually. The female citizens look like they were designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. One of New York's most compelling bands. Dissonant harmonies, purposely shrill vocals, and edge of hysteria insanity. From Captain Beefheart to Frank Zappa to Steve Reich to the B-52s to Devo to Thelonious Monk to Roxy Music and back again, the Model Citizens provide a constantly shifting series of unnatural polyrhythms building on top of each other. More than any other band, they have captured what it means to be alive in America in the late 1970s, reflecting the frightened, scattered, painful, and edge of ecstatic world of the moment." The New York Times, in similarly flowery language, said, "The Model Citizens, a new rock sextet that appeared at Hurrah Friday Night, has achieved something increasingly difficult to attain in this novelty-prone age, a uniqueness. Whether the band is important or pleasurable is something else, but at least it's innovative. The 4 frontline performers, Steve Alexander, Eugenie Diserio, Tomek Lamprecht, and Gloria Richards, dress with artsy elegance. The men, who are clean-cut and handsome, wear suits, although the effect is less stockbrokerish than Elvis Costello-ish. The women, who are very pretty, adorn themselves in what look like Dada approximations of 1950s high fashion. The visual effect is like an uptown B-52s. The music that these Model Citizens make is even more unusual. It's high energy, tense, and pointillistic, akin to both fusion jazz and the sort of progressive rock that Queen and Genesis espouse. But it's quite lacking in balladic softness or rhetoric. Instead, the herky-jerky energy of Devo, or sometimes the Talking Heads, comes to mind." If you're curious, after hearing those reviews, to know what it was like to see Model Citizens in concert, fortunately, there is a video on YouTube that captures them in all of their strangeness and quirkiness and uniqueness. So fortunately, that video does exist for us today to relive what it must have been like to be at Hurrah's or Max's in 1978 and have seen Model Citizens in concert. With those fantastic reviews in mind, I'd like to welcome Eugenie Diserio. Having spoken to Steven Alexander already, I'm very excited to hear another point of view about what it was like to have been in Model Citizens. Eugenie, to start things off, can you talk a little bit about how the band came together? You met while you were students at Columbia. How was it that Model Citizens was formed?
We were all in visual arts, painters. I was a painter. I'm actually a painter again now after many, many years and many different journeys. But yeah, I personally was veering away from painting and going into like conceptual art and performance art.
And it seems to me that that's really how this band started, was as more of a performance art piece rather than a straightforward rock and roll band.
Well, yes and no. I think a lot of it was we got out of Columbia. It's like, what are you going to do? In those days, you got an MFA because you figured you had to teach college because, nobody's art careers took off till you were, middle age or older. And which, of course, didn't happen in the 80s in New York with all the young, amazing artists that came out like in their 20s. But that wasn't us because we weren't painting. But a lot of it, too, was like Talking Heads. We were all going to the clubs and stuff. And so, for example, Talking Heads, they all went to Rhode Island School of Design. So it's kind of like, okay, all these former art students were forming bands. And I think we just sort of thought, hey, what the heck? And Steve played the guitar, from his teenage years. And I think Tomek, he also was a fairly accomplished guitar player. I had not played any instruments. I always kind of sang along. I love music and sang along to every record, but a lot of it too was coming together, with instruments that, like Gloria, she never played the marimba. She just liked it because it was in Frank Zappa or something. But so a lot of it too was, not really being studied musicians, but the Talking Heads weren't either, because they just sort of picked up instruments and started to make those songs when they got out of Rhode Island School of Design. So yeah, it was, it wasn't really a deliberate thing. It was like, let's just try it. The clubs are so cool. Let's see what we can do.
When you mentioned the Talking Heads, I think they're one of the more apparent influences on Model Citizens. What other bands were you listening to? Were you seeing at Max's or at CBGB's that influenced the music of Model Citizens?
Yeah, I mean, personally for me, Patti Smith, and to this day, remains my idol. Love Patti. And in those days, yeah, I mean, it was like I loved television, Richard Hell and the Voidoids. I loved the Sex Pistols. Then Public Image was formed. I mean, it was whatever was going on down CBGB's and Max's. That's what we liked. I mean, I of course loved all traditional rock. I've always loved Hendrix, and I loved like the girl groups, the Ronettes, and all that. And I mean, I just have always been so into music my whole life. So but I would say at the time what the influences were for us. Oh, and Devo was really coming out then, and they were like, remember them? They were really cool.
You mentioned Devo, and I think it's really interesting that there was this whole Midwestern Ohio scene of Devo, Pere Ubu, the Dead Boys, Human Switchboard, that I think really had a strong impact on the New York City scene.
I think it was just kind of that zeitgeist thing of just, how everybody was coming together. Maybe some people were classically trained and forgot it, and other people had no training at all, but just started making beats and music and writing strange lyrics. And I think, punk was a really big influence, because I don't think too many of those people were, formally trained musicians, the whole English movement. And but then, I mean, I loved Dusty Springfield too, so it was, when I look back on it, if it was just me, I probably would have made a very different kind of music. But a lot of the Model Citizens was this sort of democracy, like, we wouldn't have a leader and we all would contribute. And I was reading through some of the old press, and one critic did say, on stage, the band has no leader. Rather, the focus shifts from the guys to the girls. Despite the stab at group democracy, the girls take control, or rather they mesmerize by losing control. So I guess, in many ways, the girls were the focus. But, it was such a vibrant time. Blondie, I love Blondie. They were so great, too. Ramones, I adored the Ramones. I mean, it was just such an amazing time, late 70s and 80s in New York, for music and art.
On the Model Citizens EP, I also hear sort of what would come to be known as no wave, this sort of discordant, atonal style of music that would was starting to bubble up under the surface at that point.
Well, they were at the same time. They were really at the same time. They were coming concurrently from like another, like Glenn Branca and Theoretical Girls and DNA, or you probably have exposure to all that stuff. And Lydia Lunch, James Chance.
It seems like with the no wave movement, with the more straightforward punk movement, a lot of the art rock, it seems like there were a lot of different forces at work, pulling in a lot of different directions and really pushing everybody creatively to explore new territory.
And in film, and then the visual arts thing kind of like came together again. Because a lot of, too, what had happened for us was, I don't know if Steve got into this, but we were interns at Columbia and we answered an ad for interns while students at Columbia, and it ended up being the inaugural show at PS1, which is now, MoMA PS1 in Long Island City, Queens. Well, we ended up doing the catalog for it, and in addition, we ended up completely working under the curator, Alana Heiss, organizing the show, and they were the top cutting-edge conceptual artists, in New York at the time, and there's no internet then, so you had to do everything kind of by hand, walking around through the mail. So I was also exposed to, some really intense visual artists. And I think that also spurred on just the whole kind of experimental. And they were very supportive of our band, because everybody like rock and roll in art, it just sort of meshed, you know.
Your EP was released on Spy Records, which was John Cale's record label, and he actually produced the EP. How did that arrangement come about? How did you get hooked up with John Cale?
I guess Jane Friedman, she must have seen us at CBGB's, because we were never approached by John. We were doing the club circuit, we were performing kind of a lot. And I guess she approached Jane, Jane Friedman. She had once managed Patti Smith. I mean, she's like a legend in the scene. And she was, John's partner. Anyway, I think she saw us at CBGB's, and I guess the next thing we heard, of course, I was in awe of John Cale too, being like a Velvet fan. So anyway, that's how that came about.
What was it like working with John Cale in the studio?
I was thinking about that because I knew you'd ask. My memory was, of course, feeling very intimidated. He was very, kind of aloof, and he just sort of sat at the board, and we did our takes. I don't remember, a lot of real gregarious feedback from him. He just kind of, he was just at the board, and we were doing our takes, and I don't remember him being all that, friendly or.
Having read concert reviews and such, it really seems that live shows are where Model Citizens were at their strongest. Can you talk a little bit about the live performances of the band?
At the time, we were getting a really good reputation. We were very different. The music wasn't that easy to listen to, but we had a lot of performance energy, and we were just art rock. We dressed, the Model Citizens, the guys wore the suits, and Gloria and I dressed in all this wacky high fashion, and, we were different.
One review I read compared the women's attire to a 1950s take on Dadaism, and it said that the men dressed like Elvis Costello but less stockbrokerish.
Yeah, I remember that one, and then the other one that's kind of funny is a bunch of Madison Avenue art directors on LSD. That was another comment I wrote down.
You guys were staples of the live circuit. How was the EP received? Was there much hype built around you guys actually getting into a recording studio and putting something down on vinyl?
Well, truthfully, I don't know if you found any press on the EP. I mean, I've got, I told you I save everything. So I've got all my archives from the past, and the Dance had a bunch of records that we put out. So I've got tons of press on vinyl from the Dance and from Chandra, but I couldn't find any press on the actual record, because the only reviews I have are from performances.
I asked Stephen the same question, so I'm curious to hear how your answer compares to his. Are there any concerts in particular, anybody you shared a bill with, or any venues you played that stand out in particular in your mind?
Well, I think some of the most dynamic were CBGB's. Not that I liked CBGB's. It was such a disgusting, dirty place, but it had, major energy, and the crowd it was just a really good crowd. The other thing is, you probably are aware, Model Citizens didn't last that long.
I know, it was only about 12 months that you guys were active and performing and producing music, if I'm not mistaken.
It was a drag, because then at a certain point after the EP, we were getting romanced by a pretty high level vice president at CBS. And, he was coming to the shows, and we also did the show at the Cotton Club. I can't remember, though, if it was well attended, because we lived right up on 125th Street. But anyway, put a long story short, I guess it was just egos, and who knows, or maybe the CBS guy. I think he was sort of pitting people against one another, music business, so sleazy. All I know is we really had probably a lot of promising stuff up ahead, and we just suddenly split up. So, there wasn't that much that got done. We never toured Europe or anything. God, I'm trying to even remember if we left New York.
After Model Citizens, your next project was called The Dance. How do the two groups stack up when you compare them to one another?
Well, I don't know. Personally, I thought Model Citizens was really weird. It wasn't really the kind of music I wanted to make. I wanted more soulful music, but, as I said, there was a lot of battling ego energy in Model Citizens. Well, Steve and I were married at the time, and then, I don't know, I guess we just wanted to pursue a more soulful, funky direction. It was still arty and strange, and plenty of dance songs. They're not as dissonant as Model Citizens, but then we found Louis, who clicked with us, Louis, the bass player, And, we just started to create a rhythm section, and that's how, it's just everybody went off and did their own thing. Gloria and Tomek did this duo called Two U's, and I know they used to be in the clubs a lot, but I don't know where they went with it. The dance got record deals, and, we were touring we were going to Philly and Boston, and, I just remember constantly practicing and getting in this van. And then we got signed up with a label in London. So then we were going to London. We used to go to San Francisco like every month. There was some club out there that used to fly us out. But I don't remember. Model Citizens, yeah, probably the biggest venue was the Carnegie Hall concert. And then definitely a lot of CBGBs. A lot of Max's was still going at the time.
One of the things I was most interested in hearing about from Stephen was the album that you guys did with a young girl named Chandra. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, how that came about was, so at PS1, one of my favorite artists was Dennis Oppenheim. I was really, really intensely possessed guy and artist. And, I loved his work, and I got very friendly with him. And he had two older children, but he had this little girl that he used to use, his daughter, who at the time was maybe 6. He'd use her like in his conceptual pieces. Like if you look him up, you'll see there's this little girl like holding a puppet with like a knife in its back, and really demonic stuff. And this was Chandra. So and she went to St. Anne's in Brooklyn. She lived with her mother, and she was this little straight little girl, but she wrote really intense like lyrics, like poetry. So one thing led to another, and I can't even remember. I think it was just sort of mutual. Like maybe we just said, God, I'd love to do a performance with Chandra. And then Dennis trusted us enough and her mother that they knew, we'd be really protective of her and really careful with whatever we did with her. So that's how it came together. Like she would write her lyrics, and we created music around it. And then she performed at the Mud Club. She'd wear like, if you see her press, sneakers and a T-shirt, and, she was, we made sure she was just an innocent little girl. But then when she opened her mouth, it was like, it was demonic, like some of the stuff, at 12 that she was writing. And she performed at the Mud Club. I don't think she ever did CBG. Maybe Danceteria. But she was in the clubs, but then it wasn't very long. We recorded that record with her, and then it was just like, it wasn't right for her to be out performing. So she stopped performing. Now, today, she's, a grown woman and a mother, and has a whole other career with that work. And she, she performs those songs, and she also performs a lot of new stuff that she writes. And she had some of the things from her songs were sampled by other, bands across the world. Like we used to get royalty checks for stuff. And anyway, but she's good. She lives in Maine. She's got a daughter, probably, at this point, she's probably at 14, her daughter.
It's funny that of all the recordings you've worked on, that one seems like it might have the most longevity. That one has still managed to retain a really interesting degree of cultural cachet and coolness.
I know. Well, Subways, I think, was sampled by a pretty well-known Australian band or something. But anyway, a lot of it, too, is Chandra. Like, she's a very creative person. She's very quirky. And, I don't think I would be out singing these songs today, but she's comfortable doing it along with new material. And she actually just got in touch with me. I think she was going to be doing a big tour this summer, but not with, everything, life has changed. But she also got in touch with me several months ago about lyrics in She Likes to Beat, one of the dance songs, and she said she was covering that. She loved it. So I'm like, go for it.
You were studying visual art in the days of Model Citizens, and today you're quite a well-accomplished painter and visual artist in Connecticut. How did things come full circle for you?
No, it wasn't that quick. So the dance split up, and then Steve and I split up, and then I was pursuing a solo career with Arthur Baker. So he was producing some of my songs, and I got very close to getting a big deal. And then I got pregnant with my son, who's 31 now. And so I went to that relationship, moved to Woodstock, had him, and little by little just drifted away from the music business. It was just so burnt out on the music business. And then I was a single mother with my son, and the internet was just starting to take off in the late 90s. And I pitched AOL, an astrology site, because I'd always been an astrologer from the time I was like 14. So I was really desperate. I was a single mother, like a really creative person, had no money. And I thought, oh God. So America Online had this program where they were called the AOL Greenhouse, and they were giving seed funding to entrepreneurs. So I created this business plan, didn't know what I was doing. Anyway, I pitched this site, Astronet, and I finally got the deal. So then at one point, Astronet was the largest site on America Online and the largest astrology destination on the web. And then I sold it. Yeah, then I sold it to Hearst New Media, who was supposed to, get TV shows and magazines, and they completely ruined it. So then that dissolved. And then after that, we're now probably early 2000, 2001, 2002. And then I had another child who's now freshman at NYU. He's going to be a sophomore at NYU. And, just kind of wrote columns or, just did assorted creative things. And then about 6 years ago, my husband, we were selling our house actually, and I had a lot of my early paintings up, and people were commenting, oh, who does the abstract art? So my husband said, I think you missed your calling. You should go back to painting. So we're selling the house. So I just started painting the garage, and little by little started to put this good body of work together, and I never stopped. And that was 6 years ago. So now I'm pretty established in this area, and I have a lot of shows, and if you go on Instagram, I have a pretty big presence there. It's growing, and it's just, I love abstract painting. I love painting. It's something you can do till you take your last breath. So, and it's funny, because I had so much training in my life. So, it comes back. But, it's really just a language. It's like poetry. So I enjoy being a painter. I'm not going to say it's not frustrating at times, but I'm looking at the painting now because I did a lot of work during quarantine. But right now, between you and me, I'm a little burnt out. But I'm looking at the one. It's in progress, this big canvas right now. I can take my time with it. Eventually, if you trust yourself, things resolve. That's the regret I have. I would love to be back in the days of the music with the kind of instincts and wisdom that I have today. It'd be fun.
When you look back on the era of model citizens, the Greenwich Village, Lower East Side, late 1970s, music and art scene, it seems to me, and granted, I missed it by a couple of decades, so maybe I'm just projecting, but it appears to me that you guys were sort of writing the rule book as you went along. You were making it up as you went along and just doing whatever came naturally.
I know. No, people were making it up as they went along. But, there was a lot of talent there and a lot of really important work. And then, we don't even have to go into the visual art that then started being made. Jean-Michel Basquiat, he was a friend of ours. He used to eat like from the deli tray, in the back of the clubs when we would, have our bands. Yeah, I mean, it's just so amazing. Then he took off from his little scribble drawings, and Keith Haring was all over the street. And then, there's just so much energy.
When you talk about guys like Basquiat and Keith Haring and the filmmakers and everyone hanging around and being so communal and giving with their art, as someone who just moved to New York recently, that seems a bit unfathomable to me.
Totally true. But you know what? You have to realize, Charles, New York was different. New York was gritty and burnt out, and you could live there, and you could congregate in the East Village and wherever, and everybody could afford to be there and build the energy because everyone was living there and working there and going out to these grungy clubs. And, maybe it's like that sort of in Brooklyn today or parts of Brooklyn, not the super gentrified parts. But, the East Village was burnt out.
The late 1970s punk, CBGBs, whatever scene you want to call it, is something that's been romanticized and perhaps fetishized a lot by people who didn't get to experience it firsthand. You're one of the lucky few who was actually there playing these clubs, working with John Cale, rubbing elbows with a lot of the greats, the immortal punk legends. And that must feel really special to you that you actually got to not just experience it as a fan, but be a part of it.
Oh, it was amazing. I mean, I always say I feel so honored to have been part of New York City in the 80s. And, I still post my Instagrams kind of as a rest spot for my paintings. Like just a few days ago, they posted, because I told you I save everything. So, every now they'll post like a Throwback Thursday rock store picture. And, I'll just say, oh, back in the 80s, 80s, baby, back in the 80s with my band, The Dance. But it was an amazing time. And I mean, I know it's a lot of kind of what's made me, like a fairly ageless older person today, and really just, like, I don't really think my age. I don't act my age. I just feel like you're in this perpetual creative hum. And yeah, I'm really honored to be a painter rather than just, like a Connecticut mom housewife.
When you listen to Model Citizens today, I'm not sure if you ever go back and reflect on it, but what are your thoughts about the music today? With so much hindsight and so much that's happened between the time you made it and your current life. What are your thoughts when you go back and listen to the Model Citizens EP?
You know what? I just went upstairs and before you called, and my older son is here. My 31-year-old is working from here, and my husband's here. I said, I was really like fearless, and I had a lot of talent and a lot of, kind of excitement. I said, I'm listening to Model Citizens, and it has like really, really like good energy. It's hard, and I wrote a lot of the lyrics too. So for some reason, it was just like, I don't know. It's just like we didn't know what we were doing, but whatever we did kind of hit a nerve.
You're right. It does have great energy to this day, and as I've said, I'll repeat myself, but there's so many different influences, whether it's Talking Heads, Devo, Frank Zappa. There's so many points of reference that make it feel familiar, but also a new blend. It's like taking familiar pieces and putting them together in a whole new configuration.
I know. Well, you have to understand, Bob Medici was the drummer. He was a really accomplished musician his whole life. Gloria knew him from Portland. So he came in from Portland. And then Billy Robertson, the bass player, he was younger than all of us, but he was a really good musician, and he went on to form Polyrock. But the other thing that just when you mentioned Zappa, I mean, just for example, like Zappa saw us at CBGB's, and he came backstage, and then Gloria and I went out to breakfast with Frank Zappa. Not the guys, just me and Gloria went out in Frank Zappa's like limousine to some diner in Midtown. We were out with Frank Zappa like all night.
Had there been a Model Citizens full length, perhaps on a major label, what do you think that would have sounded like? What would the progression of the band been had you stayed together a little bit longer? I don't know. You could feel it, like we were starting to get really popular and everything to a certain crowd, and then I don't know. I guess we ruined it. I don't know if we would have gone more commercial. I mean, certainly if you had to deal with CBS, they're going to make music that's going to get played on the radio, and I don't know what would have happened. I really want to thank you for taking the time to speak to me. Do you have any concluding thoughts, any final thoughts about the short life of the great Model Citizens?
Well, it was a really exciting time. And as I said, we all lived in this loft, and Columbia's art studios were in this building. Actually, it's called Dodge Hall. I think it's still there on 125th Street, under the L, and it's where the Manhattan Project was formed. So we always used to be, and it was really old and dingy, but you'd see those nuclear signs, those atomic signs like still left in the hallway. So we all thought we were like radioactive. But anyway, then we were going to form the band, and across the street was this like chop shop, really disgusting. And then there were two lofts upstairs, and we ended up renting. I mean, when I think back to what my parents had to go through, it's like I'm living in this like loft. We tried to make it nice, but we were on top of a chop shop in a terrible area. I mean, in those days, like we'd get on the subway at 125th Street to go downtown, and like cops would come over and say, like, "What are you doing on the subway?" Or like if I was there, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" Oh, here. I'd say, "Oh, I'm going to." "Oh, no. A white girl can't be alone on the subway up here." And it's like that was New York, like in the late 70s. It was really harsh. But anyway, we lived in this loft, and we lived there, till I guess the band broke up. I mean, we had rats and everything. It was really nasty. But we had a big, Gloria and Tomek lived upstairs, and Steve and I lived on one floor, and then we had a big section where the instruments and everything were all set up, and we could practice, and that's how you got this stuff done, right? We probably paid like next to nothing for the rent for the loft, and we were able to practice there, and it worked because it was an industrial area, so at night you weren't bothering anybody. But that's how we got it all done.
Eugenie, thank you very much. This concludes our two-part episode on Model Citizens, having spoken to two of the four core members of the band. Maybe someday we'll be able to track down the other two, Gloria and Tomek. But for now, again, I want to thank Stephen and Eugenie one last time for taking the time to speak. I'm Charles Epting. This is the Lost Labels podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this foray into the history of a band that maybe you've never heard of before, but certainly a band that left their mark on New York's musical scene in the late 1970s, a band that I enjoy very much myself, and I hope if you haven't heard them, you do get a chance to check out their one and only EP, which, again, is just marvelous and, in my opinion, a real missing link between a lot of the different sonic movements that were taking place in the late 1970s in New York City. So, again, thank you for listening to the Lost Labels podcast. Until next time.